Welcome to Ifor Baptist Church series on the Book of Judges. This is the first in the series. We shall be going through it in a little more detail in the weeks to come, and I hope that you do enjoy it, whether we're live in person in the building or we are on Zoom. Either way, it will be good to journey together through this. We'll have different speakers over the weeks. And my name is Davinia. I'm a minister, as you know, at Ifor Baptist Church, and I'm starting off this session. It's quite an introductory session, and if you haven't read the book in a little while, it would be good to stop the video at this point and read the first two chapters. It'd be good to do that anyway, even if you think you are familiar with it, to be fair. In particular, I'd like you to read Judges chapter 2, the first maybe 20 or so verses. But I'll be thinking today mainly about the context of the book, where they came from and where they're going to. So please do stop the video and read that now. Thank you. So, how did you get on? Did you read it? I wonder what you thought about that. Well, I'm recording this today, Wednesday, the 12th of January 2022. I've just heard on the 1 o'clock news that the Prime Minister, Boris Johnson, has apologised for his behaviour. Who knows what consequences there will be to his behaviour between now and you actually access this video later in the week. But I think it's actually quite an apt illustration of people doing what seems right in their own eyes. And that is part of the theme of Judges. People doing what they think is right, even when they really know that something else is expected of them, something else has been commanded as the way of life. And for us during the pandemic, we know a certain way of behaviour was to be expected, was to be laid out, and to hear that others have flaunted against that is very, very difficult. Who knows what will happen with that? I'm just saying it as an illustration. I'm not making any further comment at this moment. But it is a fitting illustration of how us human beings behave. This is what the book of Judges is about. So we have a few things to consider when we come to this book. First of all, Judges. In England, when we think of judges, we think maybe of people in dark robes holding a gavel in their hand, maybe with a little old-fashioned white woven wig on their heads, proclaiming judgment. But that's not at all what it means in this context. In the context of the Old Testament, judges were leaders. And in this instance, they were leaders of a tribe, tribal leaders. That's the first thing we need to consider and remember as we go through all of this. Forget what you think a judge is. A judge in this instance, in this example, is a leader. Also, Judges is not easy reading. This is one of the darkest times in Israel history, one commentator has said, and it shows the sinfulness of humanity in a stunning display of depravity. It's not easy reading. It's quite atrocious, the behaviour of some of the people and the way some of God's people thought it was apt to deliver judgment and to treat one another and to go against what God has said. It's not easy reading at all. I remember when I was a child, if something of violence came on the television, my mum would start going, murder, 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 turn that thing off. She had no room for, she did not allow for, she did not want something of violence to be displayed and brought into the home, to be considered, to be thought about. And in fact, that's how we could think perhaps about the book of Judges. It's violent. Why is it there? Why should I be reading this? What benefits are going to do me to think about these atrocities? But it's there because it's a good reminder of how human beings are when they don't follow the way that God has laid out. The judges are not judges, they are leaders. It is not easy reading. and it comes after. And I think as I've approached it this time, that is what has stuck out to me the most. Judges comes after. Right at the beginning, the first words of Judges are, Judges chapter 1, verse 1, after the death of Joshua. So we're going to consider together some of those afters. What went before? What was it after? And why is that significant? Wow, that is a colourful slide. What's it all about? Well, this is a typical chronology of the Old Testament books, so putting them in the order of event, not necessarily in the order in which they come, although often it is very, very similar. The books in green, so Genesis, Exodus, sorry, they're yellowy green there, aren't they? Yellow and green. Genesis, Exodus, Numbers, Leviticus, and Deuteronomy, they are the law. So they all precede the books of history. So history, Joshua through to Nehemiah, including down there Chronicles, Esther, they are considered the historical books, and the pinky peachy ones are the prophets and the poetry books. And last term we looked at some of the prophets. If you remember, they usually came in the time of the kings, and then after the exile, bringing us up to the close of the Old Testament. So where does Judges fit into this? Well, where is it, you say? It's right here. As you can see, Judges came after. It came after Joshua. It came after Deuteronomy, Numbers, Leviticus, Exodus, and Genesis. So that's where it fits in the history of Israel. That's the period of the Judges, these tribal leaders. This is where it takes place. The exact dates are hard to pinpoint, and scholars don't always agree. But we know that it was after Joshua and before Israel had a king. And that's one of the things that makes it quite a significant book. So here we are seeing the things that it came after, and you'll see down there it came after the beginnings, which is Genesis. It came after Moses, which we read about in Exodus, Leviticus, Deuteronomy, and Numbers. So we will have a little look at each of these in a little bit of detail, because it's important to know what it came after. That's the first thing it tells us, that it came after. It also came after Joshua. And within the book of Joshua, we will see that it came after the whole generation of elders who had experienced and knew God had died. So the events in the book of Judges took place after the initial attempts to conquer Canaan, as God had told his people to do. So this potted history of Genesis, Exodus, Leviticus, Numbers, Deuteronomy, and Joshua, hopefully it will be of interest and it will be of help. So Genesis is about the beginning, so Judges comes after Genesis. And as I said, I'm not talking about dates here, I'm talking about just in order. It came after Genesis. Genesis speaks of the beginnings, the creation of humanity. Genesis tells us how people fell. Human beings fell away from God's plan. They turned away and thought they could do something different other than what God had expected. And that's important to remember when we're reading the book of Judges. We also read in Genesis of the flood of the whole earth, and of how Noah, the righteous man, was saved. God had made a way. Again, that's a good thing to remember when you're reading the book of Judges. In Genesis, we read how humanity scattered throughout the earth. And then we read of the call of Abraham and the covenant promise that God made to him. In Genesis chapter 15, verse 17, it says he is to take and possess the land. Genesis takes us from Eden and then to Egypt as Abraham's descendants begin to work out what it means to take and possess this land of Canaan. Significant to know what went before so that when we get to Judges, we understand what's going on. By the end of Genesis, we've got to Jacob's 12 sons, and they are of significance because, of course, from these 12 sons came the 12 tribes of Israel. And within Joshua, we'll see how that's where the tribes had the land distributed out to them. They were allotted certain parcels of land for them to take and possess. And within Judges, you will read, you've probably hopefully read already in those first 2 chapters, how Judah, the tribe of Judah, raised up and did something, maybe in collaboration with another tribe. And maybe another tribe did something else or attempted to do something else or failed to do something else. So rather than being a whole group of people with one leader, now they're operating as tribes, as individual tribes. So after Genesis, we have Exodus. So we left Genesis with the 12 sons of Jacob, and they were in Egypt at the time. And at the very beginning of Exodus, all is well. The people of God, these who have descended from Abraham and Isaac and Jacob, they are doing well in Egypt. They're respected, they are treated well. But then another Pharaoh comes along and things change quite rapidly. Oppression, enslavement. The people of God are no longer treated as human, but they are just mere tools for the Egyptian Pharaoh to get his work done and get his kingdom built. God again calls Moses, and he calls him, he hears the cries of his people, and he says, God heard the cries and came to rescue them and to bring them to Canaan. That's where they were going. That's where Judges is, in the land of Canaan. You read that in Exodus chapter 3, verses 7 and 8. God heard the cries and came to rescue them, to bring them to the land of Canaan. The call is clear. The promise is there. They are to possess the land, and God will help them to do that. And in Exodus, we read that God reveals who he is. He reveals his name and his character in a way that he has not done so explicitly before, or that is not recorded so explicitly before. It's a name to remember. That's what he says. Yahweh, I am who I am. I will be who I will be. It is a name to remember. And again, that's significant for the people in the time of the Judges, that they should remember the name of God. So God intervenes into this oppression and brings rescue. We read of the plagues and the Passover in the Exodus and the people coming towards the promised land. Within Exodus, we begin to read about the provision that God makes through the miracles of bread and birds and provision in great ways. The law comes in the form of the commandments. We read of the establishment of the priesthood and the tabernacle. And the tabernacle was that central place of worship that would be at the center of the camp as they moved around the desert. And around this central focusing place for worship, the tribes would each have their allotted space around the tabernacle, around the tent where God would meet with his people, meet with his priest, and the priest would then bring the message to the people. But it was a central place of worship. I wonder where that has gone by the time we get to Judges. So Genesis, Exodus, Leviticus, Numbers, Deuteronomy. Wow, a lot going on, isn't there? So Leviticus, Numbers, and Deuteronomy drill down on how the people of God should behave. God's people were called to be distinct. How they would live their lives would show others who God was. Their customs and practices showed a God who was holy. through their morals, through their hygiene, through the food that they ate, how they prepared their food, what they didn't eat. That would be distinct from the people around them. And this is what God wanted. And this is how God, one of the ways in which God was going to show himself as a holy God. But God had also provided a means of access through the priesthood, through the sacrificial system. Numbers speaks of the wandering in the desert. And we've mentioned before the provision of manna, the provision of the flock of birds that came just at the right time. Deuteronomy speaks more of the law and how that is to be lived out. So all of these things come before Judges. Judges comes after all of these things, and that's significant, and that's to be remembered. Judges comes after the beginnings. It comes after Moses, after they had received the law by which they were to live. However, something that we need to note and we need to remember is that God allowed Moses, before he died, to see the promised land, to view the broad panorama. One commentator said, the broad panorama of the land of inheritance that he swore he would give him. He could see it, but he could not enter it. Why could Moses not enter the land? The Lord spoke to Moses and Aaron, and he said, because you did not believe me, you did not trust in me enough to honor me as holy in the eyes of my people. Therefore, you will not bring these people into the land which I have given them. Moses, this great leader of the people of God, he didn't do it right at one point. And maybe as an example, maybe as a reminder, maybe as a not even Moses could get in, watch how you walk. Should the people in the time of Judges have remembered that? Remember, this period was all about passing on an oral history. You shall tell your children, and your children shall tell your children's children. The people in the book of Judges would have been told these stories over and over and over again. They came after the beginnings. They came after Moses. They came after Joshua. So Genesis, Exodus, Leviticus, Numbers, Deuteronomy, Joshua. Joshua starts with an after. It says, after the death of Moses, Joshua chapter 1, verse 1, after the death of Moses, the Lord said to Joshua. And he tells Joshua what is to happen. So let's just have a reminder of what that was. After the death of Moses, the servant of the Lord said to Joshua, son of Nun, Moses' aide, Moses, my servant, is dead. Now then, you and all these people get ready to cross the Jordan River into the land I am about to give you. Give to the Israelites. I will give you every place that you set your foot, as I promised Moses. Your territory will extend from the desert to Lebanon, from the great river, the Euphrates, all the Hittite country to the great sea on the west. No one will be able to stand against you all the days of your life. As I was with Moses, so I will be with you. I will never leave you nor forsake you. Be strong and very courageous. Maybe that's a familiar text to some of us. We need to bear that text in mind when we get to Judges. This is the promise of God, that the land was theirs. God was faithful to his promises. Why should they doubt him? Why should they do anything differently? We see God's fulfillment of his covenant promises to Abraham in bringing Israel into the land. We see in Joshua the conquest of Canaan under his leadership, and we read about the division of the land among the tribes. By the end of Joshua chapter 24, and this is, I think, of great significance coming in to the book of Judges. Joshua chapter 24, verses 29. We'll start with that one. I'm skipping ahead of myself in the Bible. I've got the Judges already, so let's just get back to Joshua 24, and I'll read from verse 29. Then Joshua sent the people away, each to his own inheritance. Remember, the land has been divided. That was verse 28. After these things, Joshua son of Nun, the servant of the Lord, died at the age of 110. And they buried him in the land of his inheritance at Timnath Serah in the hill country of Ephraim, north of Mount Gaash. Israel served the Lord throughout the lifetime of Joshua and of the leaders who outlived him and who had experienced everything the Lord had done for Israel. Let me read that again. Israel served the Lord throughout the lifetime of Joshua and of the elders who outlived him and who had experienced everything the Lord had done for Israel. Judges comes after the beginning. It comes after Moses and that agreed way of life, how the distinct people of God would serve this holy God, how they could access and worship him. It came after Joshua, the servant of God, who led into the land of Canaan. Judges comes as the whole generation who experienced and knew God in that period that we've just been talking about as they died. This is when Judges come. It is a dark time for the people of Israel. And it starts with, after the death of Joshua, the Israelites asked the Lord, who will be the first to go up and fight for us against the Canaanites? So there they are, seeking God, off to a great start. How are we going to do it? Which of the tribes is going to go in first? And you can read it there in the overview of the book, in a sense, in Judges chapter 1 and chapter 2. And as I said, if you're going to read anything today, read in particular the beginnings of chapter 2, because it speaks there of the cycle of disobedience and defeat that is just occurs again and again and again throughout the book of Judges. Everything that went before them, it seems that they have forgotten it. Have they remembered that God said, I am who I am and I will be who I will be? Have they remembered the promise that was given to Abraham, the promise that came to Joshua? I will be with you. You can have every piece of land on which you step your foot. I will never leave you. That same promise was theirs. Had they forgotten the way of life that they were supposed to live and began to compromise and begin to lose their distinctness and begin to look like the people in the lands around them? They forget the ways of God, or they choose not to follow the ways of God, and they fall. Because God is a holy God, and he has said, I will be with you. Will you be with me? And they fall, they get oppressed, and in their distress they cry out. And they cry out to this faithful and this patient God who raises up a judge, raises up a leader for them, who will rally them and will say, yes, let's do this, let's go this way. And they, for a time, follow. But then they forget. And so the cycle continues. So this is, in a sense, the book starts off. We've got this overview, and then the first few judges that we'll look at, really good people, really, they're on it, they're doing it, they're faithful. But decline comes and comes and comes with compromise into some of the darkest places. The book of Judges is a hard book. Why are we doing it? Can't we have some hope at the beginning of this difficult year? Well, what can we learn? We learn in Judges that God is faithful and that he is patient. God is holy and he is just, and he always provides a way. Through the lives of the people that God uses, the men and women that God raises up as his judges, as his leaders, we see that although people may be imperfect, although we may be imperfect, God can use us. It reminds us, sadly, we need this reminder, what happens when people forget God and forget his ways. It reminds us that we are to be distinct. We are not to conform to the pattern of this world, but that we are to be transformed by the renewing of our minds. The verse for this year in Iford Baptist Church is Ephesians chapter 2, verse 10. For we are God's workmanship, created in Christ Jesus to do good works. These good works, this distinctness, what distinctly are the people of God to do that he has prepared in advance for us to do? And as I said last week, yes, it may be about specific callings of things that each of us and all of us are called to do, but it could be our way of life, to be distinct from the world in how we care for people, in our kindness, in our attitude, in our uprightness, in how we handle our money, how we treat our families, how we do business, our diligence in the workplace. What kind of people are we to be? A distinct people as the people of God. But in Judges, as I said, we've looked a lot at what was before and how God had been leading and reminding his people. But Judges points to the hope that is coming. After Judges comes a king. And first of all, there are the earthly kings. There was Saul and there was David and there are kings that come. But all of this, again, is pointing to God's provision and that a king is coming. And we know that that is the Messiah. And yes, he came in a way that was unexpected, and he lived a life that was unexpected, and he died a death that could not be understood. But all of this was the holy God's provision out of his love for his creation. Even when they forget, even when they fall, he has made a way for them. And we thank God in the name of Jesus. Amen.